Hey everyone, grab a look at the wall here today. We're going to pop inside in a second where there's less cars and less wind. But I wanted you to see this because we're going to talk about what is going on here at the corner wall and what all this may have to do with Christian living and our experience of who God is. So, catch you inside. You saw just a second ago that the wall over in the graveyard has fallen down. And some of us Nicaragua team alumni, we're not experts, but we're not bad with mortar and blocks and plumb lines and setting blocks and all that type of stuff. We thought that we'd have a go at fixing that little part there because it's small, and we figured, what could we do that's worse? It's already fallen right over. And the powers that be said, yeah, have a go, have a go. The Nicaragua team alumni, when we're down in Nicaragua, usually we're working with large cinder blocks. And here, we're working with little limestone slabs. And so before we got going, there was a lot of time spent on YouTube and in books and chatting up folks at wherever we bought the concrete, saying, how do we do this? There was a lot of theorizing going on about how to best lay limestone slab. And I put my time in, watching the videos and all that, but I gotta tell you, there is a big difference between theorizing and holding ideas in my mind versus actually figuring out how to get the blocks to lay level and to be sturdy and to, hold up a wall. And why do I tell you all this? I'm sure you're not really interested in the church wall. The truth is that as I was laying blocks and I was thinking about the theories that we held about blocks and the actual experience of putting them in, there are some very important parallels that we can draw to the Christian life here. The Christian life is not about holding ideas and theories about who God is necessarily. In fact, the Christian life is about walking with and knowing Jesus Christ. It's about an experiential relationship with Him. And in this short video, we are going to delve into that. How do we know God? What is it to have an experience with Jesus? What does that mean for us? I want to tell you about someone from the 1400s, Christian history. There's a person named Thomas, and he lived in Europe, and he was a monk. And his role in the community that he lived in was to write out copies of ancient manuscripts. At that time, the printing press hadn't yet been developed. And so he would spend his days, he would, do prayer and a bit of worship in the morning, but the bulk of his day was copying out ancient manuscripts so that we could have, even today, have copies of some of the things that those folks would have written out. One of the things Thomas thought about as he copied out these ancient manuscripts, as he thought about the ideas that were present in them, is that it's good and wonderful to know things, get an education if you have that available to you, certainly. But he thought to himself that it is more important to experience God than to have a bunch of really great ideas about who God is. In fact, I have a little quote from him, and I wrote it down so that I would say it the right way. Thomas says he's copying out all these books and dealing with all these big and great ideas. He says, God, in His many manifestations, is more interested in being experienced than being defined. It's worth wondering, is that an idea that we see in Scripture? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. There are many stories from Scripture where God reveals Himself to His people, but I thought I would just choose one for today and share that with you. In John 4, we see the woman at the well, and Jesus walks up to her, and they have a little conversation about who she is, some of the things that maybe she has done. And the woman comes back to Jesus, and she wants to talk about where to worship and which mountain is important and the difference between Samaritans and Jews and their theological ideas. And Jesus more or less says to her, Look, I am the Messiah and I am right in front of you. Let's have an encounter. Leave these ideas about where to worship. They're important in their own right, but let's see what's more important now. The fact that God has come to you and is speaking to you right here, right now. A similar dynamic I want to encourage you is true of our lives in the Christian life. I know for myself it's very easy to get wrapped up in books. I can disappear into ideas for longer than really I should. And this week I was remembering as I was reading this guy Thomas that God comes to me, that God is a real person. God is revealed in the person of Jesus, who has thoughts and feelings and carries out a relationship with me. And I thought maybe I could remind us of that in this short video. Let's go and chat with Peter for a second, everyone, and we'll talk about what experiences of God are like, how to maybe have some, and why they're important for the Christian life. I've got no real questions today. We thought we would just shoot the breeze about our experience of God and why that's important. What do you think?
I think two things come to mind immediately. One is to be heady for a moment, and I think that reading Scripture can be a real live experience of God. That God, that the words come alive, that something really happens. Now, I realize this story is from a while ago in my life, but I remember having a lay person read Scripture, and he was reading in Philippians, and partway through the reading, there's this long pause. And I thought, he's just lost his way. Like, just lost where he was, the line.
Yeah.
And then it was longer than that, and I thought, I hope he has a heart attack or something like that. And then he picked up and kept going, and things were all good. And on the way out, he said to me, I need to talk to you about what happened when I was reading Scripture. I realized that pause was really long. And he said, suddenly, I wasn't reading. The Bible was reading me. So Scripture came alive. And I've had the experience in reading the Bible that suddenly this is for me. The words leap off the page. And doesn't happen when I read a novel, that there's something different going on here. So that's one thing. The other is, I think that people do have genuine experiences of meeting Jesus, have visions of Jesus, here and now, in our time and place. And I think that in North American culture that sounds weird. Certainly doesn't sound weird in African culture, or I assume in South American or Central American culture, to have visions of Jesus. A woman came to me, not in this church, so you don't need to figure out who it is. A woman came to me and said, I need to ask you whether I'm crazy. And she told me this story. It's a really difficult time in her life. She was up at 3 o'clock in the morning looking out their living room window out onto their front lawn. And Jesus walked up the front walk and through the door and gave her a hug and went out the back door. And she said, am I crazy? No, not in the least. I think that really can happen.
Yeah.
That really are experiences of God. Now, obviously, one is dramatic in terms of visions, but the other, I think, is one that happens to us more frequently than we're prepared to maybe recognize, where God comes alive, the Word is spoken to us, and lives in us.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I'm thinking, I don't know who to look at here. I'll look at the camera. I'm thinking even of our recent congregational retreat, everyone. We examined ideas and theories and concepts that day, but there was a few of us in the worship team, and I was up on the stage as the day concluded, and I think it was Desmond and I were trying to figure out how the rhythm should go for this song, and I remember looking up, and I mean the people there, they were Presbyterian, so they weren't dancing in the aisle, but they were close. I remember looking up and thinking, there is something going on in this gathering of Christians that I wasn't, expecting, really. I also think, maybe you can comment on this, there's a little saying that my youth pastor buddies and I have, and that is, if you want to be hit by a truck, you play in the road, which maybe not the nicest thing, but what it means to say is if you want to have an experience of God, place yourself in situations where you're liable to be, encounter Him in the Christian practices and prayer and worship and all. Do you want to speak to that little ramble at all, or?
Yeah, I think that we do need those Christian practices. They shape us and form us. Previous conversation, I've used this example of I need to eat 3 meals a day. Well, maybe I could go with 2, but we eat 3 meals a day. But we can't necessarily remember everything we ate each time. But we do remember those moments that are the great banquet or something happened at those meals. And so the spiritual practices are a routine that open us up to those moments where there is a breakthrough, where we do experience God, where something happens. I also think that those practices teach us to expect something to happen. So there was a study done in the 1990s asking people when they came to church to figure out whether something happened in church. And the first question they asked of people was, on the way in, do you expect to meet God today? And they kept track of those who expected to meet God and those who didn't. And guess what? On the way out, when they interviewed people, those who expected to meet God had a much higher chance of meeting God than those who came with no expectation.
Yeah.
And so I think that the spiritual practices teach us to expect something to happen. And if we're expecting it, it's more likely to take place. That's not wish fulfillment. If I go on a walk and I expect to see wildlife, I'll be tuned in to see wildlife. If I go not expecting to see anything, I'm probably not going to notice the bird or the squirrel or the chipmunk in the same way as I do if I go expecting to see.
I like that. I think maybe we'll cut it there, everybody. What should we say? Expect to experience God?
Absolutely.
Yeah. God bless you, everybody, as you live out your Christian life, as your Maker walks with you. Be encouraged in your Christian practices and expect to see God at work. I mean, why not? He really is there, and He loves His people in this world that He created. We'll see you next time, everyone.